I have another question. Do you ever have a spouse that is reluctant? One wants to do NFP and the other one is very reluctant? And how do you handle those situations?
Yeah, definitely. I have some couples where the man is pushing the woman to come, and she's just really nervous to come off her birth control. So explaining how it works, and explaining, how it's not good for her body, how it actually can impede their marriage, and how NFP can enhance their marriage and her overall health and bring them closer together, that really works. But of course, we also have it where the man is not as interested, and that's generally what I see. I'm sure they see it as well. It just makes them really nervous. So we really encourage it to be a group effort. It's not just the fertility of the woman, it's the fertility of the couple, and that's the only meaningful discussion of fertility, is the fertility of the couple. And so to really educate them on it, and once they understand the science behind all these models, they're much, much more open to it and understanding of it. And there's so many spiritual aspects to it, but the convincing part for those skeptics really is the medical statistics behind it and all those research articles that have been done behind it. So
I just want to add a little, from the guy's perspective, since that's what we're talking about. But I try to emphasize the fact that relations, under the NFP model is not like you're giving up things, which, in our culture today, sex is everything, and I try to emphasize the fact that you're not giving up things, you're actually gaining things. I'm gaining a wife who's healthier. She's not required to take all these hormones, which is going to mess her up. Her entire attitude and outlook on life is based on these hormones, and they're influencing the way she is. I'd rather have her healthy and go through a normal cycle and go through the highs and lows of that cycle the way she's supposed to. It's just a much more good environment for the couple and for me too. And that's something I try to emphasize: the fact that it's so healthy and that she's a woman like she should be, the way God created her. So, and that's kind of a neat thing. So.
I spend a lot of time in premarital counseling about marital relations, and not because the church is caught up in it, but because the society has got it so wrong, having to correct it. And it's been my experience that both the husband and wife are afraid. He's afraid he's not going to have access to his wife whenever he feels like it, which is a very naive way for a man to be looking at his wife. He's looking at his wife like she is recreational equipment, as opposed to somebody he cherishes. So I have to tap into his love for his future bride. If you love your wife, you're going to reconsider this whole hormonal thing, the whole birth control thing, if you really love her, and if you don't just look at her as a way of achieving sexual pleasure. And with the woman's perspective, a lot of times what I get from them is they're afraid of not being able to be intimate at a moment's notice, and they fear that that'll put some distance between them, or will somehow damage the relationship. So one of the things I highly encourage couples preparing for marriage is to rediscover what their grandparents and great-grandparents knew, and that was non-sexual intimacy. That they had to learn how to hold hands, they had to learn how to hug, they had to learn how to kiss, and leave it at that, and not just rush into the bedroom and think that that's what their expression of love for one another. Their expression for love for one another could be as simple as holding hands. And the example I use for them that usually kind of works is, if you see an 80-year-old couple walking down the street holding hands, what do you think? And almost every time, both the groom and the bride smile, because they think that's neat. And I said, are you guys doing that now? Because that couple didn't learn it in their 70s. They learned it when they were courting. They didn't. So they knew what they had to do in terms of expressing their their love for one another in a non-sexual way, that was what courting was all about, and that will carry them through times when sex is not possible. That's one of the things I had to tell the guy. The guy doesn't think about these things at all. We're not geared towards this. But I said, at some point in your marriage, it may not be terribly far away, sex will be taken off the table. What are you going to do? And he's looking at me, it's like, what do you mean sex is going to be taken off the table? Well, and he's very naive in this, that there'll be conditions. Your wife is sick, she's pregnant, she's just had a baby, and it may take a good long time before sex is now a possibility again. And he's just looking with a sense of terror in his eyes. It's like, this is not fair. And it's like, you need to get a handle on what this is all about. How do you express your affection for your spouse if she's got the flu? And, well, okay, I'll hold her hand. I can do that. So it just never occurs to the guy, and it's totally gotten out of the vocabulary of our society, that there are intimacies that have nothing to do with the bedroom, that they need to be able to do this. And I strongly encourage those couples to refrain from any activity they wouldn't be willing to do in front of their grandmother. And that really brings it home for most of them. It's like, okay. And when I get to that last session, which it really is about NFP, and then they find out there is a time period that they have to abstain from having relations, I said, well, okay, how long have you guys been meeting with me? Oh, it's been about 6 months. Have you abstained from having relations? And almost every couple has said yes. So don't tell me you can't do 5, 6, 7, however many days it's going to be. If you've done 6 months, you can do this. But again, there's that fear. There is a fear that they won't be able to do it. And part of the reason that they have doubts is all of these methods require two things: discipline, which our society does not really embrace, and virtue, which is a sign, that's something that's completely devoid in our society, the idea of virtue. So without virtue, without discipline, you're not going to do well with any of these systems. But then again, you're not going to do well without discipline using the pill, because she's going to have to take it every day. Misses 1 dose, well, 2 doses, even worse. So we have to recognize that there's more going on here in terms of just having sex. There's a dynamic between husband and wife that usually the husband doesn't understand until maybe he'll never figure out in the course of his marriage, but most men don't have the foggiest idea what they're getting into when they marry, and I think women have a better understanding of it. But they need to understand that this isn't just about recreation. This is about something very important, about the health of their wife, the health of their marriage. And if they approach this properly, they will make themselves fairly divorce-proof. Because if you've got a husband that can talk about your mucus, maybe that's, you need to kind of quiet him down on that a little bit. But if he is knowledgeable of your cycle, what can't you talk about? You've got communication beyond 90% of the couples in this country if you can talk about her cycle. You know, most guys going down the supermarket aisle, oh, wrong aisle, got to back up, because it's that feminine care aisle, and it's out of his element there. And that's the way most men look at it. You might think it is a supreme sacrifice to go in that aisle and buy something for his wife, when in reality he ought to be understanding that this is part of the woman he is marrying. He's not marrying a body, he's marrying a person who has this cycle, who has this fertility that he provides as well. All right? They also think that, again, we talked about fertility being a couple thing. Most guys don't realize that they're the ones that provide the wide window of fertility. It's not the woman. That egg is only viable for about 24 hours. He provides a 5-day window in there with regard to how long his sperm can survive in the fallopian tube. So that's a surprise to him that he's the one that is really the big contributor to fertility. It's not her. And all this responsibility is almost always thrown off on her. In reality, he's the one that needs to own up and say he's the one that's providing that big fat window for possibly conceiving a child. So I think a lot of education is really required in our society. Virtue, understanding that men actually figure out what this girl stuff is all about, and girls not being shy about it and sharing it with their husbands, and understanding that this is part of what he is married. He's not marrying just one aspect, he's marrying the whole package of this woman. So it's an important thing that this fear be dispelled at some point in the marriage. Either the classes you guys provide or pre-Cana that I provide, or at some point, maybe